Hello. Hi, everybody. Can I have your attention? Hi, my name is Anushka Shah. I work as a researcher at the Center for Civic Media on the Media Cloud project. So we asked some really interesting questions in this last session. And for this session, the aim is to review some of the tools that might help us answer those questions. The aim is to be aware of these tools, but to also critique them as a way to maybe help us develop better tools in the future. So we're going to start with the first one, which is Media Cloud. Of course, I'm biased towards that. So we have Hal Roberts and Natalie Gyenes here to present Media Cloud.
Awesome. Just have some gorgeous slides for you that are just emerged on the screen. Amazing. So this introductory slide, I'm not sure if you remember it from Brittany's presentation yesterday. I stole it because I think it's a wonderful format. And essentially what we're going to be talking today is a suite of tools that's developed out of a partnership with the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society and the Center for Civic Media over here. And the focus of this will be this concept of democratizing media analysis tools, creating open source tools that anybody can use, that we're hopefully making easier to use over time. We'll go through the tools itself, and then Hal will show you a bit about our more complex tools. So hopefully you feel empowered by the end of this session to create your own topics and do your own research with Media Cloud. So here we have this concept of the information ecosystem, the media ecosystem, and there's so many different components that we now have started to try and analyze in the form of networks. And we have tons of data, and a lot of the conversations emerging today is both how to aggregate it and how to analyze it, who gets access to it, and how we can democratize that process as much as possible. So here's a text-heavy slide. Tells you a bit about our tools. We're open source. We're mainly focused on trying to partner with non-government organizations and activists to try to help them understand both how the media talks about the issues that they care about and to try to understand what may be some gaps in coverage that can be filled with the initiatives that NGOs or activists take. So we've got actually closer to 60,000 sources from all around the world right now. We mentioned 195 countries because that's what's possible. We do have the majority of the world's countries in our database and can do it in a number of languages. We do also have close to 700 million stories in our database, which have been collected as early as 2008. But we do, because of link rot and a number of other methodological challenges, we really do try to do more recent searches in the last year or 2 years. And I think Hal will talk about that in a bit more detail when he talks about some of the research that's come out of the Berkman Center. So we have these three main tools that we use for our analysis, the Explorer tool, the Topic Mapper tool, and the Source Manager tool. And they take you all the way from developing and crafting the necessary database that you need to answer the particular research questions that you have, all the way through to running particular queries similarly to the way you would on Google, and then exploring how a particular topic is spoken about in the media and what coverage looks like over time. So the kind of amazing, the slides are up here, this is great. The three main sort of pathways of analysis that we take with the Media Cloud tools is first we look at attention. So attention to a particular topic. How does it evolve over time? Are there particular key events that led to increases or peaks in coverage? And is it possible that a particular event or program or project led to an overall increase in the amount of coverage that the topic has received over time? Is it now a main topic on a global news agenda, for example? And I'll talk a bit about that with an example from our recent research with the Washington Post on the Parkland shootings. Also, we explore what themes or subtopics receive the most amount of attention within an overall broader topic. So interestingly, for example, when we did a follow-up of net neutrality research and trying to find out which were the most influential subtopics or frames or narratives around net neutrality, turns out John Oliver was particularly influential, and this kind of humor narrative, as we've talked a lot about over the course of the last 2 days, was the most effective in garnering support and engaging audiences. The second layer of analysis that you can do with the tools is looking at influence. So which key media sources have content that's cited the most frequently? which key media sources have published stories that are cited the most frequently. So we use in-linking as a metric. And we also use Facebook shares as a metric. And we have the ability to access some Twitter data as well, which I think Hal will chat with you a little bit about. And we also look at linking structure. So as we've seen in a number of the really beautiful visualizations over the last couple of days, we're able to map out media networks based on citations between particular media sources or media stories. And one interesting thing we're exploring right now is trying to understand the particular network around a given story. Rather than looking at a source and who references and cites it to determine different, so to speak, echo chambers on the web, we also look at the network of stories to see how a public health article on vaccines, if it was published by the Harvard School of Public Health, the Washington Post, and the CDC, what do the different networks of whom cite that particular piece of content look like, and how does it differ depending if we're looking at a news media publication of the same information or a public health information authority's publication of that information. And then we also look at language. So what are the top terms used to describe a particular concept? How does language change over time if we're looking at small or large time slices? And does the language that we use to talk about particular topics change depending on the partisan affiliation of sources or the media source type? And we found some interesting findings, as I'm sure you can imagine, with the topic of environmental health, actually working with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And it was an interesting finding that we saw that our left-leaning media sources referred to the relationship between environment and health as a product of climate change, whereas our right-leaning media sources referred to it as an issue of environment and the relationships between environment and health. So it's a similar topic, but spoken about differently depending on your source outputs. So our three tools that we're chat about, the first one is the Source Manager tool. And this is where you're able to create your own data sets. We have sources that are now organized and disaggregated from different countries around the world. We have local sources, state-level sources, and national-level sources that you can feel free to explore on our Source Manager tool. We also have all of the links at the top of these slides, and we can send them out for ease. You're able to review individual sources in our database and see how early they began collecting sources, so you know whether or not it's a feasible source collection to use for depending on your research question. And you also have the ability to suggest new sources. So if there are sources that are not yet in our database that you're interested in exploring, there's the opportunity to do that as well. Our second tool is the Explorer tool. Also, the link is up here. This is kind of the basic query tool, the same way as you would search for a particular set of terms on Google, but using a Boolean search query format. You're able to run one query in the database of sources that we already have. So again, this is 60,000 sources. It's a pretty hefty database. And you can, again, disaggregate based on certain topics that we have broad collections of, or country, either national, local, or state level. And I wanted to highlight some interesting findings that we've been working on with the Washington Post over here, and I'll show a little bit more in one of the visualizations that our newest researcher, Anissa, put together this week. But a few of the features that we have in this tool are first, as you can see on the bottom, I think that's right. My left and right were never my strongest suit. Exploring a topical coverage over time, exploring whether peaks and troughs in coverage are associated with particular events. And here, for the Parkland shooting, it was actually the first shooting of, I think it was the last 6 years of, I can't believe I'm saying this, of the mass shootings in America over the last 6 or 7 years. This was the only one that had repeated peaks in coverage. It didn't have one large peak in coverage and then taper off. And we'll show you Anissa's visualization to look at that in a bit more detail. Here you're able to select your media source, your time frame, and we have a couple of other interesting features. We have a top named entities and places mentioned feature where you can see which entities were mentioned the most often for a particular event. So here I compared the Parkland massacre with the Orlando massacre, and this was actually one of the first shootings where the NRA played such a prominent role as a named entity in media coverage surrounding the shooting itself. So you're able to compare these top named entities, compare the countries that are referenced most frequently in a particular, for a particular topic. And you're also able to download all of the data in CSV files. So you can do the analysis on your own if there's external software that you're interested in analyzing as well. We have the topic mapper tool, which Hal will explain in a bit more detail, but that essentially spans beyond our existing database and follows in links for 15 iterations in order to create a more comprehensive database of what exists on the web for a particular topic. And again, Hal will go into a bit more detail for that. Here you have similar word cloud visualizations. You can explore language use and how that changes over time. And you can also create subtopics, which essentially disaggregate your existing database depending on if there's other terms you want to add to your query. And then here, I apologize that it's so small, but essentially we were looking at the term fake news over time and how the new term emerged and what it looked like. But because we don't have that much time, I'll keep it to Hal. Here is the interesting visualization that we put together just using the CSV file of our data. We looked at 5 shootings over the last 6 years and what media coverage looked like for the 14 days beginning at the shooting and afterwards. And as we can see, it was actually the Orlando shooting that received overall the most amount of news media coverage. But again, the Parkland shooting was the only one with sustained coverage that has kept that way over time. So the Washington Post published this article 2 days ago, so if you're interested, feel free to check it out. For the language use and word frequency, which is another feature in all of our tools, I also wanted to highlight another interesting research finding, also with a collaboration with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, is we were looking at the Head Start program in the United States to try to figure out, what dominant narratives were presented in the media when we think about early childhood feeding programs. And in our word cloud, this term immigrant emerged. And why does immigration have to be a part of every conversation? But we looked into it more deeply with this keywords and context feature that we have in our topic mapper tool. And that helps us disaggregate the narrative a little bit around that particular key term. And here we found that children in this context were referred to as immigrants from illegal immigrants. And that was the most dominant frame used to describe children within this context of early childhood feeding programs in the United States. So we use this type of information to answer questions about, how can we reframe these existing concepts? What partnerships are needed to make in order to shift these dominant narratives in the media? And now it's Hal's turn.
You can see it's my turn because of the much less pretty slide. So what I wanted to do is just reinforce that you guys can do this if you're interested in this, and especially this crowd. Many of you have your own tools, but many of you don't. All of the research that Yochai talked about yesterday and all of the research we do as a team is done somewhat through the Explorer tool that Natalie showed, but mostly through this topic mapper tool. And again, the basic idea of the topic mapper is we search our own database, this sort of crawled database of stories that we download from RSS feeds. We download about 1 million stories from RSS feeds every day. But then we spider out from that to find additional stories. It's almost always the case when we run one of these topics that some, if not most, of the sources and stories that are most influential in a given topic are ones that we didn't have in our sort of crawled RSS data because we didn't crawl Wikipedia or we didn't crawl that particular source. So I just want to walk. I'm going to do this really fast. It might be befuddling and confusing because it's so fast, but I just want to walk you through the process of how we create and look at these topics. The idea is just to impress the point that you can go on and do this today, and it works. If you have questions, just come and ask us, and we're very enthusiastic to help folks. So this is the basic topic creation screen. This is a hypothetical topic I created to look at coverage of cancer in the U.S. So you can see there's a date range there. I can say what the range I want to be. There's a seed query, which just means I'm searching for everything that means cancer. Cancer is easy. Some other queries can be much more complicated. And then you select from our set of sources what sources you want to cover. This can be US. You can select from any country. We have a number of specialized sets here. Once you select the stories, it actually does a preview for you, so you can tell that your query is sane and is returning both in the sense of coverage over time and not shown here. We actually give a random sample of stories so you can validate that your stories are both have high precision and recall, which is to say they're about what you think they are and they're covering all the stories you want them to. and then you just confirm it, and then you get this cute picture of kittens for anywhere from a couple hours to a week, because we have to actually go crawl the web to get the stuff. So it takes a while, but it happens eventually. And then you get to go to your topic screen. This is actually not, if you're clever, you'll notice this is not Cancer 2017, because I did the other one last night. So this is just a cancer topic that we ran for 2016. And you can see here, one of the most useful things we get out of any of these is just the basic histogram. That's just because that usually points out the peaks where people were paying attention to the thing. You also get lists of top stories. So when Natalie talks about influence, you can analyze it in a lot of ways, but a lot of times the most interesting and valuable thing is just getting the list of the 10 or 50 or whatever top stories and just reading them and figuring out what they're about. So for cancer, for instance, this is fascinating. You can see specific mentions of breast and prostate cancer to get an idea of what's covered. Hugely interesting. You see lots of celebrities here. So when people think of cancer, they're actually talking often about celebrities who die. You can also sort that by Facebook shares. And then you end up, one of the interesting things about this cancer topic is there are a lot of mentions of cancer that aren't literally about the disease cancer. They're about something being a cancer. And generally those, you could see that as a bug, but I actually see that as a feature of the system where if we want to know how people are understanding cancer, it's understood not just as a literal disease, but as a sort of metaphorical, evil in the world. And then you get a similar thing. You get the list of the top media, so you can understand what the most influential speakers are. You can sort that by Facebook shares. We have the ability to do these network maps. We punt a little bit here because network mapping is really, really hard. The NodeXL guys are going to be up here explaining their amazing tool. It's really hard to build those tools, so we don't try to build it. We use NodeXL alternative called Gephi for most of our work, and we just give you the file and let you do that work yourself. So you just end up downloading a network file and then graph it yourself. You can also dive down into individual stories. So there's a story called One Last Kiss that if you look at the title, you know what it is. You can go to there's a little Read It Now link over there that you can go to read the actual story. And you can also see who linked to it. And just from seeing who linked to it, you can see that there was a country singer who died. And you can also dive down into the details for an individual media source. You can see when it was getting coverage. And you can see this is ABC, so I'm interested on that list of sources by Facebook shares. ABC was the highest, so what's ABC doing here? ABC has generally more cultural coverage, including some of things that, again, Trump National Security Advisor Mike Flynn has called Islam a cancer. So we get a lot of celebrity mentions, a lot of sort of metaphorical mentions. Natalie mentioned subtopics. So the idea of a subtopic is you can break the larger topic like cancer down into smaller communities and see the topic as if it exists only as stories within that community. So when we're looking at political topics, for instance, you can use partisanship. So when we're doing the election work, for instance, we can look at the coverage of the election just from within the right or just from the center left. We have lots of other options for how to do that, and we're increasing those over time. One of our main ways of using our data is downloading CSVs. So we build this big, complicated, beautiful web interface, and a lot of the value we get out of it is downloading a CSV of data, and that's what we find. And a lot of researchers are in a sort of in-between space where they want to do their own sorts of analysis that a generic UI is not going to handle. But also they're not API capable, so they're not able to actually write a Python script to get the data, or they have to get someone to do that. So CSVs are great. We do an enormous amount of our work is just ourselves happens in these CSVs. We also have, I just want to point out an API. Everything that Natalie has shown, everything that I've shown, it's all implemented on front-end tools that only access our back-end through our API, and it's the same API that's available to the public. There are obviously some endpoints that have authorization or authentication, but literally all of the functionality that you see in the tools is available in the API. So if you are API capable, all of the data is there for grabbing and building your own tools on top So this is just an example of a return value from our stories API. This is just listing all of the stories. You can see the title, all the tags. We have an AP syndicated flag. And this is an example. We also have word counting. The most detailed data you can get from our API is just lists of bags of words from down either to a query level or individual story level. And this is an example of when we, so I just last night dumped this, network data for this cancer topic into Gephi. This took me, I spent a lot of time in Gephi, so I have a skill set, but this took me literally 5 minutes to dump this in. Gephi has Louvain community detection, so I ran that, and I ran this map, and you already see this sort of interesting, there's sort of a more health-oriented green sphere, there's a more sort of culturally oriented blue sphere, and again, that took me 5 minutes. All right, I'm done.
Just taking it back, grounding towards the audiences that we're trying to serve in developing this tool. Again, it's a really comprehensive and super rigorous database, and for organizations and individuals that don't have the bandwidth or the capacity to download a CSV file, learn Gephi, we've tried to create these front-end tools that are as usable as possible. We're actually currently working with an amazing user researcher, Susan, to try to make these tools a bit more user-friendly, specifically currently focusing on documentary filmmaker populations and relevant funders. So we continue to run workshops, kind of tutorials. We're super open with offering support and helping you narrow down what research questions you can answer with the tool. Everything, again, I mean, this is not the community we need to preach to. It's all totally open source. It's open data. You have access to everything. And we would be super curious about the types of research questions you're asking using the tool, the types of investigations you're interested in doing. And if there's any interesting collaborations or blog posts you're interested in writing, do feel free to reach out. Here's our website. We have a community group online. We have an awesome blog where we post updates. We have our press and publications section, which continues to fill up, which makes us all so happy and excited that the tool is being used. We have a support email address if you have any particular questions, and you can contact any of the Media Cloud team with any other issues or questions you may have. Awesome. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nat and Hal. I'm just going to add one more quick point to that, is that Media Cloud has sources from across 20 different languages, including Hindi, Chinese, Japanese. So I do a lot of the India-specific research on that, and having access to the Hindi and the English for that is really helpful. We're going to save the Q&A for the end, just in the interest of time. So next up, we have Marc from NodeXL. I love their motto, their tagline. It's MS Paint for networks. So over to you, Marc.
Clicker, right? Hello, folks. Hi, I'm Marc. I'm a sociologist. It's good to be here. So the Social Media Research Foundation is a group of people. We are social scientists, computer scientists, and our aspiration is to make it possible to think link without a PhD, to make network about as challenging a data structure as pie chart. And the goal is therefore to let there be quite a bit of network out there. You can see us at smrfoundation.org. We have a nice group of people who do not deny that they are associated with the organization. So far, some of them have been in this room. And so the goal here is to ask questions like, what does a hashtag look like? What is an adequate visualization of social media? What is an adequate analytic artifact for non-software developers to trade in? What do I do if I want to do this research on a topic? And I just want to get my data, analyze my data, visualize my data, and start to tell the stories about it. So first, I'll try to motivate the why of visualization. This is famously Anscombe's quartet. What's interesting about the data? Difficult to say. How about statistical summaries? They're all the same. Where's the error? Where's the interesting trend? 300 milliseconds later, information visualization to the rescue. You're going to see a lot of pattern in your data using your visual cortex, more than your higher level abilities to do numeric analysis. Some of you have that ability, most of us don't. And so the metaphor we like to use is that crowds really matter. If that crowd existed right this second, a picture of it will appear in the front of the New York Times. It would really matter. When crowds form in social media, they also matter, perhaps more so, because gathering as a physical crowd is so difficult these days. And the issue then is, what's that crowd look like? And can we make the analysis of that crowd really easy? And so that's what that crowd looked like at that time. Polarized, not surprising, skewed in its interests. I added the color manually, but you can guess based on the tags at the top of the boxes. Those are the words associated with the people in that cluster. It gives you a deeper insight into what's going on in that discussion. Who are the leaders? What are the divisions? What are the topic vectors associated with them? And so network visualization is hard. Clever people like Cody Dunn here in Boston, formerly of Ben Schneiderman's group at the University of Maryland, have come up with some interesting techniques, and no doubt more work is necessary to make visualizations of social networks, networks broadly, more palatable and more informative. But with these graphs, and maybe there are lots of ways of drawing these graphs, we're starting to get some insights into the shape of social media. In the same way that we might look at how the proliferation of camera phones have really revealed a lot about our society that otherwise went unnoticed. Now maybe if we had the digital camera for social networks, we would be making some progress. So social networks reveal some interesting patterns about organizations. The challenge is, how do I get those pictures? And of course, before this technology was released, photography was a profession. And after this technology, it was an avocation. If we ask a reporter to take a picture, most of them will say yes. If we ask them to grind glass into lenses first and mix chemicals into film, the number of photographs will go down. And so our aspiration is maybe to be a tool for digital media imagery that's sort of a cheap disposable camera. Maybe we could upgrade to digital. Of course, this object became obsolete a little while ago, so our real aspiration is this. Can we be the app on your phone that's going to take a picture of a crowd, not a physical crowd, but a virtual crowd? And so it looks kind of like that. It's a spreadsheet. We just heard how important CSV is. It's really the place where data goes to be worked on by people who are not developers. And so what we've done is added a ribbon to Excel. It's got all the stuff in it to do the 5 basic things that you would think in a network society you could do. And you can't. Well, you could, but most people. The 5 things are: get a network, put it somewhere, do something with it, analyze it, visualize it, tell a story about it. 5 things that's really hard to do with a network. For us, you go into a menu, you get, let's say you want a Twitter search. You then say what kind of Twitter search you would like, and then you press a button, you get coffee, you come back, you get a network. It's going to look maybe like that. We really recommend a second LCD. It's the best $150 you can spend. That and a little bit more RAM. So you're going to get all of this with, importantly, I don't know if this has a laser. No, right, laser. The button there, Automate Run, is for us the equivalent of that autofocus white balance mode on your camera, where you just take the picture for me, would you? I'll tell you what to take the picture of. You just do the picture taking. It will do all the analysis that you, we hope, want done to your network data set. No doubt there are pieces missing, but we're looking for the 80% case of let's do all the things that you need done. You're going to calculate centralities. You're going to visualize subgraph images. You're going to analyze each edge. We're going to do some content and time series analytics. There's the content analytics. I have a very negative sentiment about sentiment. And so this is a slightly alternative approach in which we simply allow you to use our lists, should you want to. We're Americans for the most part, so that's American English. But there's also some German and Spanish lurking at the bottom because we have some additional people. And you can, of course, erase these lists and replace them with whatever collections of words that you as a subject matter expert know represent these different clusters. We then generate results at the 4 resolutions that we operate at, the edge, the vertex, the group, the graph, and you're going to get content analytics at those resolutions. So this is us as of yesterday. This is the EMEMIT map. And it's a way of looking at what just happened here virtually. Who is at the center of our organization? You're at the center of our organization. There you go. But who else is at the center of our organization? And what were the words that were most closely associated with our discussion? And maybe you noticed that I tweeted this, and maybe you noticed that I didn't include the hashtags. And for good reason. I think our conversation today and yesterday suggests that if you use those words, it's sort of like saying the name of the devil. He may appear. And so those things attract people. And so our goal is to make this domain more visible, to make it actually possible to see those incoming attacks, to see when a tail is wagging a dog. And when you make the network visualization, those kinds of things do appear. So we want to see the time series. And by the way, today, slackers, come on, tweet. Come on, let's get those tweets going. Everybody was excited to tweet yesterday, not so much today. And then this is an alternative view. This is our attempt to pivot the graph into a path diagram where we're looking at essentially a thread tree. And these people are actually talking about Kentucky Fried Chicken, but you can see that the conversation does not get deep very often. In many cases, social media is not a conversational environment. It is more moss than it is maples. So our aspiration, if we can make this camera really widely available, maybe more people will take pictures. And maybe if those pictures are taken from around the planet, we will get a more composite view. Rather than attempting to boil the whole ocean, we are boiling buckets of water one at a time. And so this worked. If you go to Google Scholar and type in NodeXL, there are now thousands of papers, and our aspiration is that many of them wouldn't have existed. It's not that these are people who would have used Gephi or not. They need the one-button solution, or there's 6 buttons you have to press. Relatively few button solution. And so these papers are appearing. We're delighted to see them. We'd love to see more of them. And so the foundation then helps people publish these results. After all, number 5 on the list was share this insight with another human being. And therefore, we have this thing we like to call the Flickr of networks until Verizon owned Flickr, which is a great shame to me. 11 years of my kids' photos in there. So now it's the Instagram for graphs. We could call it Instagraph. And it's a way of publishing a lot of these network diagrams in a way that, well, develops a community of practice. The graphs are getting better over time as people share the recipes for generating them. It also reveals the incredible diversity of morphological structures in social media networks. They're not all the same. And so looking at these patterns, we start to see certain structures recur frequently. Some do not. Some have very different structures. And we're interested in, for example, this is Media Lab from a couple of days ago. We're interested in understanding which kind of shape is this? How many kinds of shapes are there? Where are you in your shape? Who's in the position that you wanted to be in? How would you get there? And so like many maps, they have multiple functions. So social media, it's all networks. And it's all networks in machine-readable form. And there are many kinds of ties, linking people together, all sorts of ways of creating an edge. And so what we want to do is make it so that the comparison of these things becomes easy, that it's easy to think link, that it's easy for people to think about edges without, of course, learning Python. And so the aspiration becomes make the edge a unit of analysis for lots of disciplines. And there's an edge list. It's just in a spreadsheet. Most of our users are pretty good at getting in there and using it. If you take a lot of pictures, they start to resemble one another. You start putting them in piles. We ended up with 6. This is from a report with Pew from a couple of years back, in which we found that if you go taking pictures of the networks in Twitter, you're going to find that they come in a variety of shapes, and that not all of these shapes are of equal frequency. Thankfully, polarization is not the dominant pattern, unless you're talking about politics. The other patterns are important. And this is the report where we describe it. And the patterns we're looking for in this data are things like hub and spoke patterns. Hub and spoke patterns actually show up frequently, and they're the sign of audience. They're not the sign of community, they're not the sign of brand, there's a sign of audience. We're also, of course, looking for bridges. There's my bridge, come visit my bridge. We're looking for the people who might actually span those separate groups. And of course, islands. Islands are typically ignored in social media analysis. Islands are the people who connected to no one and no one connected to them. Some people refer to them as losers. We actually refer to them as proof you are a brand. If you've attracted these isolates into your graph, people have heard your name and can actually utter it all by themselves. So it's an important thing to look at the fraction of isolates. So there's the network analysis data flow. We want to make that about as challenging as pressing the button on your camera phone to take a picture. And that would then shift a lot of the research energy to the other side of the equation, which is, what's that picture say? Because a lot of time is spent making these pictures, grinding glass, making film, setting exposure levels, modifying the picture afterwards. Let's tell stories about pictures would be my aspiration. So we make it easy. There's a data provider. You can get the data. There's a data container. There's some place to put it. There's a place to do the data analysis. We have a lot of metrics. We'd love to have more. We do the data visualization, and in this case, you're seeing it in the group in a box layout. This is an innovation from Cody Dunn, where we essentially, with Ben Schneiderman's inspiration, we take a tree map and we put the graph inside of the segments of the tree map. And then, of course, data publication. We want to get you to share the insight in that graph with another person. If the time to graph is, let's say, less than 5 or 10 minutes, then the rest of your hour can be spent talking about what's in that graph and what does it tell us. And so what does it tell us? Who are the influencers? Are there subgroups? Who are the bridges? Using that, research is possible. It's possible to take these pictures and point them in places and come away with some useful stories. And therefore, we can help people think link. We can get them to a point where they can start to look at their data sets and say, well, these are not the same. And this reveals a certain kind of generative process. If we have these two clusters, then we have a divisive discussion group. So there they are in closer detail. These are just different visualizations of these different types of network morphologies. There's the remarkably handsome and talented Derek Hansen and Ben Schneiderman. There's our book, a copy of which is on the back table there, and let me know if you'd like a copy. And so, there you go. What we want to do is talk about the variety of phases, because they're not all equal and they're not all equally good. It may be the case that you got to getting an audience, but what you really want to do is grow a community. And of course, there's the opposite side, where you want to take these things apart. So some shapes are better than others, and it is difficult sometimes to transit from one morphology to another. It's not easy to go from fragmented to unified. It's not easy to go from unified to divided, thankfully. And so the challenge we have is that we built information systems. Those information systems are not the same as high-quality information systems. And information quality is not the same thing as information validity. It could be that you got a lot of value out of something that was false. And so we got a lot of challenges over the last couple of days. The number of obstacles in front of us start piling up. It is probably the case that we can't hit you with the truth stick and make you see the light. And so what are we going to do? I think what we need to do is sort of retreat to tribal epistemology. I know it's supposed to be a bad thing, but it might be a better thing. And what we could be thinking about are the architectures for social media that include safety. Right now, I see nothing but accelerator pedal. I see only the ability to make information be more amplified. I see very few features for the deceleration of information. And so the question I would have is, where is the information break? What is the way of diminishing the speed of information? And there is a challenge. We believe that a rising tide lifts all boats. And what we're seeing is that some boats are better than others. And we seem to be falling behind. Our community, took a great deal of pleasure in how liberatory these technologies were, and we seem to be facing some opposition where the definition of liberation varies. So maybe if we have better pictures of social media, we can bring some of the forces of social control back into play. If you could see the trolls in your network, maybe you could address them and you could have a shared artifact in which we would all say, but look, those are the trolls. And so what are the eyes on the virtual street? So in the conversations of the last day, what I hear is that there is an increased need for detection. We need a radar system. We need to be able to visualize social media. What I haven't heard a lot about are the shields. What are the possible ways of deflecting an attack? And then, of course, there is the entirely ethically dubious discussion of what about swords? Should we build swords? When you are attacked and you try to defend, is the right thing to do to come back out on the attack? And I got to say, I personally, I'm not that thrilled with swords. I think, you know, live by it, die by it. And maybe there's an argument about pumping energy and, you know, negative energy into systems, and the more you do, the more you're going to get back. On the other hand, shields. It'd be nice to check that box. What do you do when you are, in fact, the subject of one of these attacks? What do we do? There are these polls that we would like to avoid. Hey, how about a license for speech? How about regulating it? How about stopping people from doing all of this? That's the baby with the bathwater. We'd like to keep the baby. At the same time, should we leave the castle gates open? Should it just be wide open and anybody can do anything? That seems also a topic to avoid. And so could we come up with better designs that are resistant to this kind of attack without going to gatekeeper, without going straight to, well, Snopes is going to solve the problem for us. That's how we're going to get out of this. Or Mr. Zuckerberg is going to decide what reality is for us. So I wonder, why can it not be that I nominate some of you as my super curators, my editors? And if you were my editor and you saw a tweet and you knew it to be factually inaccurate or just merely offensive, you could label it do not display, and I would, when I get to see it, I only get to see a little line that says, this tweet not displayed, because you told Ethan that his judgment is good enough for you. If we did that, a lot of the air goes out of the balloon. A lot of the things that attract people to the memeing will go away, because the people who you're actually using it as a form of symbolic violence against will never see it. And that could be a positive thing. Is that more filter bubble? I'm not convinced that filter bubbles are bad. I think we might actually want some more filter bubble. So if you'd like a map, let me know. We can make maps for you. The aspiration we have is to be the point-and-shoot digital camera for virtual crowds to make networks about as challenging as pie charts. So with that, I thank you. Maybe you have questions. Yeah, thank you. Oh, yeah, at the end.
Thank you, Marc. I think this is why we need more sociologists. Those were some incredible analogies. So thank you for making network analysis look that easy. Next up, for all the bot enthusiasts in the room, we have Botometer. And Onur, on to you.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Onur. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Northeastern University. But the talk that I'm going to give today is mostly related to part of my PhD work at Indiana University. So it's done by Indiana University Network Science Institute and the group at the Center for Complex Network Research. So we all familiar with this picture from the yesterday's talks. So we have been seeing more and more these type of news online, and we kind of like get into the discussions to see them more frequently and had to talk more about them. So when we look at like how this type of information spread and online, there are like over 30,000 retweets that we observe about these collections. And we wanted to understand who are the people that are actually helping to disseminate, what are the characteristics of those users, in temporal dimension and spatial dimensions, how these memes spread through the internet, and in this case specifically for Twitter. And here we see all the retweets sharing the article, and each nodes represent one of these actors that are helping to disseminate those informations. And the color is scaled by the automation those accounts are in a way using. So the more red the account color is, they are more likely to be a social bot. So they have been using more network automation. And some of the nodes, I'm not sure if it's like really clear. The yellow ones are the suspended accounts or the accounts that are going to private or the closed accounts. So some of the key players, the large hubs, are more red likely. So the bots are kind of like motivating and pushing those news to go forward. And that makes us to be really interested about who are the individual accounts pushing those news. And one common actors are like we can blame social bots, but we also know that not all the social bots are benign. So we see problems around social bots like the fake followers problems or the ones manipulating the stock markets, but there are also bots used for the dissemination, also good information for the crisis events. There are good intentions to creating social bots to engage with people and stimulate conversation, but like the one on the left top, done by Microsoft Research, is quickly used as an abuse tool. So it's the conversation change rapidly. So to understand all these dissemination behavior and the actors like the social bots better, the Indiana University developed a tool called Observatory on Social Media, in short, OSoMe, because of the reasons that I'm gonna share soon. And you can reach it from the osome.iuni.iu.edu address. And there are several tools that we have been developing under this project. And today I'm specifically mention and talk more about like the Hoxian botometer. But there are tools like trend tools. So you can submit a query that can be a hashtag or username and give a range of dates. So we can get the results for the past 18 months, and you can see the amount of activity people are like talking about those. And we also give flexibility to be able to export the images and export the data. So if you wanted to analyze by yourself or do your own visualizations, it's also possible. You can share your analysis on social media to make your followers and your audience can also see it. So we have interactive network graphs. Similar to the trend tool, this time you can submit your hashtags, give the date interval, and then there are two types of graphs that we can create. So one is here that we show about like the eclipse is the hashtag co-occurrences. What are the two or many hashtags that co-occur with each other? We can also do similar things for retweet and mention network, who are the, to see who are the important users that are sharing or more central or who is retweeting whom. And by clicking the edge, you can also see the tweets about which user are retweeting the others. Similarly, we can go in this time for both time and space dimensions. So for Eclipse, we can see in US map, where are the tweets located. So these are the people by tweeting pulling the sun from the south to the north. And the other really interesting and one of the things that we are really happy is like we have lots of friends. Those are independent researchers or developers using our APIs and tools to develop their own. And we have like, for instance, Watson. So it's a Chrome application that you can use with your browser. By setting a certain threshold, you can filter down the content that are posted by bots. So it shows some message that say this account is 85% bot score. So it doesn't directly show the content to you. And the others are also other bots that you can interact, submitting some mentions, and then they do an analysis and reply to you. So our interest for social bots start with DARPA bot detection challenge a couple of years ago. So this was two-level competition. So on the first level, there are teams designing social bots to kind of push the idea of the pro-vaccine to the anti-vaccine community. And we participated in the second level to detect, like as if the experiment is happening in real time. So they play the data from the records. And we try to identify those bots designed in the first round of the experiments. And we were the second fastest and the third most accurate team in this challenge. And during this process, we started to see some regularities. Like this one from our inspection tool, we started to see like some of the images are actually taken from Wikipedia. So these are like some of this particular image is some famous nurses during the World War II. They collect these images from Wikipedia and put them as profile pictures. So there are some persuasive descriptions like nurse, mother, grandmother, etc. We see some suspicious temporal activities like the number of status goes order of hundreds within a day. And we see some simple and repetitive content, some interaction patterns that are really not regular with respect to the other accounts. And these projects, we continue to develop and add more features. And it turns out to be the Botometer, that's an online platform that you can use. So you can submit your Twitter handle, and we can provide the bot scores for your account, or you can submit the check followers and check friends buttons. So they grab the most recent 20 friends and followers and compute scores for each of them. And we came up with mainly one score, but there's also different sub-scores. We provide 6 sub-scores to also understand in which directions an account is using automation, because the definition of bots is kind of like really difficult. I like to think it as a spectrum. It's not like a binary problem. So that's why we are looking for their friends. So they are getting lots of bot accounts followed by lots of bots. Then it will reflect the friend score. We are looking for the network. Do they create lots of artificial links to grow their audience? Then the network score getting increased. Or if there are any regularities for the temporal score. So if these accounts are posting some URL to some Amazon products every 5 minutes, then it's become more clear with the temporal dimensions. Like for instance, in my own account, I am around like 40% bot score. Most of my content is kind of like academics sharing, paper sharing, news. So my content scores is a little bit higher. But I am also experimenting a lot with my own network structure. So I have some automated tools to follow and unfollow on behalf of me, which is kind of the automation that is increasing my bot score. So it's kind of like my personal account's somewhere in between humans and bots. And this score is a little bit older, but the same idea, like looking for as a spectrum. So Justin Bieber photos is definitely a bot that are sharing the automated contents and pictures. And there are some accounts in between that are harder to identify. They are more sophisticated than the simple bots. And there are organizational accounts. There isn't one person controlling the accounts. There's a group of people managing and curating the content, looking for the best time and to maximize the audience interactions. So we see some of these automations and intelligence behavior also reflected our Botometer score. And over time, we look at also the different data sets. And like the honeypot accounts are one of the earliest examples that people collect to build such systems. And we can really identify those with high scores, even though like the blue curves are humans. So with these 2 annotated dataset and honeypot dataset, we didn't see much changes for the human behavior. But over time, the annotated bots, which are more recent and more sophisticated, getting closer to the humans. So they are using more sophisticated tools. So this is kind of like the arm race that we have been always talking about. So our goal is kind of like improving our systems, improving our data set to push these boundaries and making the more sophisticated bots are more easy to detect. So we also did some estimates on the entire bot population. So we set different thresholds to be more aggressive to identifying bots or be more forgiving. And our estimates was around 9 to 15%, which is kind of like a little bit underestimates if we take into account all the sophisticated bots that we might not be able to identify nowadays. And we are really looking forward to work together with academia and industry. And one of the things that we really want to push forward is like building tools all together, sharing the data, sharing the systems. And one way that we try to make this happen is like creating the bot repository. So we are sharing tools and data set that other researchers or partners in industry developing. And we are asking always the researchers when a new paper comes out, can you willing to share your data set? We will be really like to put it on our website. So we are also creating the common platform for the researchers working in the bot detection community. And we have an API for almost all of our tools. So Botometer is one of them. You can use our API to query large number of accounts. And this is one thing also helping community to identify bots. So another tool that I mentioned earlier is Hoxie. Hoxie is like a search engine to visualize and spreads of claims and fact-checking. So it starts with like searching simple claims or phrases. And once you search, it finds the relevant articles published. So those can be the claims or fact check. Like in this case, this is 3 million illegal voters. And the first article came from the Infowars. And then right after, it is debunked by PolitiFact and Snoops. But before this actually happens, the Infowars article shared over 50,000 times on Facebook. And in our collection, we have almost 18,000 tweets mentioning those URL. And you can also access the Hoxie from hoxie.iuni.iu.edu. And once you submit your query, we provide you some additional information. So there's a temporal aspect. We can see cumulatively how many tweets are shared in both claims and fact check sites. And you can also play it as a simulation. So you can see the growth of network over time. And recently we are adding the capabilities of putting the bot scores on this visualization. So we are combining the capabilities of Botometer with the Hoxie. So you can see there are mainly 3 communities. So the blue links are the, actually gray links are the claims, and the yellow links are the fact checks. So there is like a huge community, the Prism Planet, disseminating this information, and the including real Donald Trump. Some people are also sharing those news. And the fact-checking communities are trying to share those articles just to make people aware of like it's already debunked, so there's no truth on this article. And when we look at like the colors of these nodes, neighbors of the Prism Planet, we see some of the red nodes. Those are the bots that are trying to push the article and make it more visible to different communities. And by developing such tools and using them for both research and understanding the phenomena online, we kind of come into some conclusions. Like, we know that the bots are the super spreaders. So we see some accounts sharing the same single article over 1,000 times. So these are kind of like Alex Jones, for instance, one of them, creating the posts and then try to gather some attention, delete the post, and then repost again. So their number of status count doesn't really increase much over time, but they temporarily keep posting the same thing to their audience until they get their attentions. And when we compare the most active accounts in terms of sharing the content, their bot scores are more higher compared to the random sample that we observe in our collections. And the bot scores of the main core users on the right bottom, they tended to increase for the more central users. So the more central users are more bot likely. And bots are strategic. So the way bots are behaving have some certain goals. So to understand that better, we look at the legs of the content. So we are looking for the, after the first tweets, within the 10 seconds, majority of the accounts who try to push those articles are more bot likely. So early on, they try to create an impact. And another interesting observation that we have, we look at the accounts with different bot score percentiles, and we look at who are those bots are trying to influence. So we see the more bot-likely accounts are trying to influence people with high number of followers. Those are kind of like people like Donald Trump. Bots are, anytime these people post some content, they reply to them and say, check this out, this article is really relevant. So they try to change their opinion by interacting with them, by mentioning them. And bots are effective. So we also look at the retweeting behavior among those accounts. So on the top, there's the heat map, the density plot. And we will look at who are the people originating the content, and who are the people that are retweeting the content. And for the retweeters, we see more human activities, but when we condition on the content, what are the content that humans share, we see there are almost equally humans are retweeting contents from both humans and bots. So some of the bots kind of pass beyond our cognitive capabilities to detect them and make us share their own content. And on the bottom, we have different article domains. I'm not sure if they are easy to read, but the red ones are the sites like Infowars and Breitbart. So they have really active, they can post like from 10,000 to 10 million articles over time, but they tend to have higher median bot scores. Their sharers tend to have higher median bot scores. And those are the tools that we have been developing. We are improving every day. We are about to release a new version of the botometer by new features, better training data sets, and other technological improvements. We are going to release soon the new version of the Hoxie that are combining the capabilities of botometer and Hoxie. And please check it out. Please provide your feedback and let us know like what we can do better, how we can cooperate to make it better. And this is like a really work done by a really large team, and I was really lucky and happy to be part of this team at Indiana University. So Filippo Menzer is the main PI of the project, and you can check our group websites. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Onur. Thank you. In the spirit of data sharing, a lot of the tools that have been all of the tools that have been prioritized today are open source. So we have 2 more to go. Next, we have our friends from across the river from Boston University, Kate and Lee, presenting TCAT, or the more internet-friendly TCAT.
Thank you. I think I got a mic, so I'm good. Thanks.
Hello, good morning. Good morning. My name is Zhang.
And I'm Kate.
Yeah, and we're from Boston University. We are both PhD students at the Emerging Media Studies program. And we're here, originally, I think Jacob Groshek is supposed to give a talk here, but he's not available. He's actually out of country. So we come here to share with you a tool that we use quite extensively at BU. It's called TCAT. And hopefully, by the end of this presentation, you will have some general ideas about TCAT and also maybe think of different ways it can help you to build your own data set and help your research in other ways. So what is a BU-TCAT? TCAT is short for Twitter Collection and Analysis Toolkit. It was originally developed in 2014 by scholars in Amsterdam. And BU-TCAT is Boston University's implementation set up and overseen by Jacob Groshek. Now, the natural question is, what can TCAT do for you? Let's consider the hypothetical research topic. I think the idea of global warming and climate change just came up in one of the talks. For example, you want to study global warming, climate change, skepticism. There are different ways you can go. The first one is keep track of tweets that contain certain keywords. And the second way is, if you're lucky enough and you already have a list of Twitter accounts of those climate change skeptics and you want to follow their activity, you want to follow their tweets. And the third way to go is maybe you want to get 1% sample of all tweets and then analyze and trying to capture the climate change skeptics' discourse within the sample. Now, actually, it happens, these are the 3 modes that TCAT can work. So basically, when you install TCAT, you get to choose whether you want the keyword tracking mode or the account tracking mode or the sample mode, okay? And if you have the space, you can install all 3 versions on your server or cloud platform. Now, again, the question, what the TCAT can do if you choose to go one of those options. Let's, hypothetically, you choose to go with the keyword tracking option. You can now, collected 100,000 tweets, a large number of data sets. You might want to know who are the most active users, who gets mentioned the most. You look at exactly what's mentioned in the tweet. What are the most used hashtags? Now, speaking of hashtags, we might also want to know what hashtags tend to be used together, to kind of form a hashtag network. Or what websites got mentioned the most? Basically, you want to know for climate change skeptics, do they hate CNN more or BBC more, basically? And if you're interested, what kind of platform or client those tweets come from, you can actually using TCAT to look at, do they use iPhone, Android, or tweeting from the web? You can actually break it down day by day, see, oh, maybe on Wednesday, they tend to tweet more from Android, or on Sunday, they tend to tweet more on the web because people are staying at home. Now, with all these stats and all these features, you've gone through them, and now I want to see the data. I want to see the tweets. Now you can export a random sample, like 1,000 tweets from the large data set. Or, if you have the time, you can export all of them. Now, these are the thoughts that might be going through when you have the data set. And TCAT can do all this for you. Better yet, you don't need to code. So how do we do that? There are two options. One is you can go to the GitHub page and then follow the tutorial, install your own TCAT. And if you don't want to do that, you can go to sodaanalytics.io, and then there's a pay option too. If you want to go for the first option, I did that myself. If you have no experience working with a server or a cloud platform such as Amazon Web Services, then you probably need to read some tutorials, but it's pretty straightforward. It's a little difficult, but not very difficult. And if you have any issues that come across any questions or maybe have advices, then you can go to the GitHub page, and then they have a very helpful forum, and they actually respond to your concerns pretty quickly. I find it very useful. Now, this is my introduction of TCAT. You might want to know what exactly the feature looks like. I'm now turning the floor over to my friend and colleague, Kate.
Thank you, Lee. Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to walk you through the BU-TCAT to see what the interface looks like. This is the main page. I just put in a search for the fake news as one of the keywords, but this is an example of what you may be able to track a bunch of different keywords and have different data sets on your TCAT. You would need to put in a start date and end date. There are a number of parameters that you can select to have a selection from the larger data set of the tweets that you're collecting. I find the start date, end date is typically the most straightforward and useful. Something to note about the TCAT in general, because it taps into the streaming API on Twitter, is that you can only collect moving forward when you insert your keywords. You can't collect moving backwards. So this may require an element of cynicism, like when a crisis is starting to unfold, being aware that it would be good to hop on the TCAT if you're interested to put in the search keywords to start collecting moving forward. You would need to pay like Crimson Hexagon or a service like that to collect data moving backward. So this is I've put in a search for fake news for 1 month from February to March. This is just an overview that you get. You can see basically the tweets that contain links or don't contain links, also the number of tweets and the number of distinct users. So there's a lot of the same users are tweeting a lot in this data set, it seems. You have about 250,000 users, but over 600,000 tweets. So this just gives you a sense of what your data set starts to look like, and this is a nice graph with the frequencies that shows the peaks. Something's clearly going on in the middle of February, for example, as opposed to the beginning of February. And you can break this down into days and hours and minutes. Minutes might be a bit much, probably, for a longer set. But so the first thing that you can do with the TCAT is to get all of the data that you're collecting. This is the tweet exports page. And as you can see, you can do a lot of different options within the tweet exports. You can get the random sample, as Lee mentioned. And you can also get all of the tweets with all of the metadata. You can also, this is a neat feature that really only works with smaller data sets, but you can get individual retweets with chronological data, so you could really start to reconstruct retweet chains if you wanted to. We do have the functionality for geolocated tweets, but it's not very useful because no one tags their tweets with locations typically. But that is an option. You can also export tweet IDs, all of the hashtags that are used, the mentions, and all of the URLs. And then within the TCAT, you can also start to parse your data with different kinds of exports with our beloved CSV files. And really there are three main functions within these kinds of exports. You look at what is being discussed, so the tweets, the content, who is part of the discussion, so users, and then also who is discussing what with whom. So this is the network functionality that's also built into the TCAT. Sorry, oh no, it's not cut off, great, okay. So this is the sort of the data selection that you can start to export. This is sort of overall. You can parse it by overall minute, hour, day, week, month, or custom date for certain exports to break down your data that way. This is just an example for tweet stats, what this would look like if I did it per week. This is a CSV file and what it looks like when you export it. So just general numbers, descriptives that you would probably want to start with in terms of describing your data set. So in terms of what is being discussed, what kind of exports you can do to explore that, there are hashtag statistics you can look at, so frequency, and then also hashtag user activity. The example I'm giving here is of the hashtag user activity from the fake news data set. Something I really like about the CSV files too, in terms of all of the data that they give you in terms of number of tweets, is that you can sort, in descending order, and then start to look at sort of the most used hashtags, for example. You can also, with all of these exports, set minimum thresholds. So I only want to export the hashtags that have been used 100 times if you don't care about the hashtag that was used once. And then you can also look at things like word frequency, identical tweet frequency, so what tweets are retweeted the most, what URLs are most being shared on Twitter within the sample, and the media frequency, which would be the links to things like images. And I'll give two examples of that. This is the identical tweet frequency, what this looks like. So you can see that the tweet that was retweeted 10,000 times from Ingraham angle. And so this is just a way into getting perhaps what's most talked about within your sample. And then this is the media frequency. I don't know what that first image is that was top shared. That's kind of an interest. The second image makes a lot of sense. It's about fake news. The first image, I don't know, fake news that the Yankees are the underdogs. I'm not sure, but that's an example of sort of an unexpected finding, potentially, that would be interesting to explore as you're doing this kind of analysis. So who is a part of the discussion? This is about the users. So this is overall user stats. You can break it down overall or by individual. I'll show you the individual, the CSV file. And again, you can sort, for example, by who's mentioned the most. So this Ingraham angle, right, she was retweeted the most. Also makes sense, mentioned the most. But then you can also start to see perhaps other, surprisingly, a lot of these users actually aren't media organizations, which is typically what I've found in some of the research that I've done with TCAT. So this gets at who are your most influential users in your data set. You can also look at the user visibility, the mention frequency, the user activity, so who's tweeting the most in the data set. Oftentimes people who are mentioned the most are not the ones who are tweeting the most. So there's a distinction there that can be interesting. And to that end, you can look at the user activity and the visibility in one CSV. So what I did here is I sorted by mentions, and then I sorted by number of tweets. So you can see disparities in terms of Donald Trump is mentioned the most, but this Avon Salez is both mentioned the most and very frequent tweeter. So might be a really engaged member of that community that might be interesting to look at. And then other data set characteristics that you can look at before I jump into the networks is what Lee had mentioned earlier about looking at Twitter client source frequency. So are people tweeting from iPhones and Androids? And you can also export a table with potential gaps in data collection, which could be really useful. Sometimes the streaming API drops out, and it would be good to notice what your data set might be missing as you're doing your final data analysis. And so finally, the network component is, I think, a really useful part of the TCAT as well. This is what the interface looks like. And I'd mention something else I really love about the TCAT is that they're really useful explanations for what each of these descriptions is. So he tells you what it does, and then also the use case that you might use if you're just starting to explore network analysis or Twitter content analysis. So these are an example of some of the graphs that you can do: social graph by mentions, also co-hashtag graphs. This is the full list. I find these top four probably the most useful, but he's added. I mean, these were new to me, to be honest, because I haven't used the TCAT in like a year. But these bipartite user source graphs, so you can start to do co-graphs of who's using and visualize who's using what devices to tweet on, for example, or who's sending what URLs. So if you're getting into more of just beyond the basics of who's saying what, but then these other data pieces that are part of Twitter. And so these are I'm just giving some examples of, so the graph files are exported in a .gexf format, and it's really easily importable into Gephi. And so this is an example of one that I did a while ago when I was looking at gay marriage over time. So I wanted to see before and after the Supreme Court decision what the discussion was about gay marriage. And so I was able to use the nice parameters in the TCAT in terms of I want to look at week 1, week 2, week 3, and I could do those exports all separately. So I had those files distinct beforehand. And then I was able to do these kinds of graphs where I could compare the visualizations over time. So this would be a graph by mention that you could do in Gephi. I'm not as good at Hal clearly is at Gephi because this is a little bit of a messy graph, but yeah, but it's fairly easy to use. This would be a co-hashtag graph, so you can see the clusters of terms that people are using and talking about a certain topic. And that's all that I have for you, unless Lee has something to add. No, thank you so much for listening. And any questions can go to, I guess, us, but mostly Jacob is the one who's the leader of the ship here. So Thank you.
Thanks, Kate and Lee. So I think we've covered news media analysis, network analysis, Twitter analysis. For the last presentation that we have today, we're going to be looking at content credibility. So we have Anne and Amy presenting Check and the Credibility Coalition. And I believe this was incubated at the MisinfoCon at MIT, right, last year? Awesome.
Mic working okay? Yeah, cool. Okay, thanks everyone. So hi everyone. So I'm going to talk first about Check, which is a tool that we built at Midan. Midan is we're a nonprofit company building tools for journalists and translators and media researchers based in the Bay Area. But frequently do work with folks here in this space. Check is a tool for collaborative verification of digital media. Typically, has been used with journalists. I'm going to Mexico tomorrow, for instance, to work with Animal Politico and AJ+. We worked with First Draft. We worked with ProPublica. We work with human rights researchers, Berkeley Human Rights Center, and the Syrian Archive, and educators, so Northwestern University and University of Nevada in Reno. But we're starting to look a lot about how these tools can be used for media researchers, and Amy will be talking about the Credibility Coalition. But in general, we see Check as a workflow management tool for analyzing online content, and in a variety of different cases. So this is kind of the abstraction of the general workflow. So if you think about discovering links that need verification, in yellow is the research part, and that's where Check is really, that's where Check's sweet spot is. So any tools like sort of like Media Cloud, like BuzzSumo, any tools that are designed for discovering links, discovering items, we try to work with, whether that's through our API, whether that's through a browser extension, and whether that's through, for instance, through TweetDeck. I'll walk through the yellow part and in detail about how that part works, which is actually the research part of Check. But then also, we also then talk a little bit about the export part. How do we export that data? We do, in fact, export to CSVs. And Ethan just announced that we're starting a CSV VC company. But we also... we are accepting investment. Yes. But we also think about other artifacts, whether that's shareable artifacts for WhatsApp or Instagram, or machine-readable data, which is part of our work with the Credibility Coalition. So again, talk through the basic workflow Check, and I'll breeze through this, and happy to talk offline in more detail, because I know lunch is coming up. So basically, if you take an item, you take a tweet of unknown provenance, unknown veracity, you want to be able to check this. Just keep in mind, this can be a tweet, this can be an image, this can be a video, this can be a URL, it can be anything. And what Check allows for is a structured way for humans in your team to verify that content and annotate that content. So you can add a headline and a description. You might be able to add labels based on like pre-populated tags or suggested tags, the geolocation. We've worked with groups like Witness, so we might add like a human rights violation, languages used, et cetera. So you can customize the types of research questions you want to ask, whether as a journalist or as a researcher. And then once you add that into Check, it's really designed for collaborative verification and annotation. So that notifies your team members, and then they can start jumping in. We use color coding, so the item gets marked as verification in progress, so it gets started. So you as a team manager can see what's going on. And then you can go through. So here's how we structure the verification process. The first is we think about verification statuses. And those are color-coded. I'll talk through what those are. And so we try to make that kind of easy to see at a glance for a team manager. Each item in Check contains the default metadata from the social media site. So you can see just whatever metadata is already provided. And then you can add additional metadata, tags, marker for importance, things like that. And then we have structured tasks to give participants clear asks and show a few examples to make sure that your investigations or the annotations are consistent. So you could be adding hundreds of tweets, dozens of tweets, but you want to make sure that people are going through the same steps to ensure that you're collecting the data that you need to do your verification work. We're starting to add bot helpers and logs of actions. So for repetitive tasks, I'll show a few examples of that. But reverse image search is really a key one for not a number of journalists to do image debunking. So we try to just automate some of these processes to help people make kind of focus on what they need to do, which is the judgment aspects of it, and try to automate some of the procedural aspects as we can. And then of course you can just add comments and notes as you do your work. So stepping through. Structured tasks, we think about these as, so when we were working with Witness, we thought about questions like this particular types of human rights violations. And so we could suggest those using Check based on the types of human rights violations that they needed to understand in the context of the Western Sahara. And when we were working with Crosscheck France, a key question for them was, is the content an original version? And so Check allows you to either use free text answers for that or more structured responses. So you can put that in the form of survey data, of a survey response using radio buttons, checkboxes, geolocation tags, time and date, et cetera. So we try to allow for that flexibility because obviously with this type of research you want to have both that kind of qualitative analysis, but also some kind of way to structure those findings. Some of the bot helpers we've been thinking about is, for instance, when you're adding an item, there's like a mental checklist that people are going through. Kind of trained verifiers are going through, and we're trying to automate some of those processes. So if an account was created very recently, we try to flag that. So especially in a breaking news situation, some people are doing verification within minutes of an item coming out, of a tweet coming out. We try to automate some of those checks, just as signals, as nudges, never completely replacing human judgment. And then also, again, I mentioned reverse image search. And so we'll detect if images are there, and then we'll just tell you might want to do reverse image search. And then you just press the button, and you can get those results. And this is basically the framework for other tools. So if you're building tools, if you have other tools that you think could plug into this, we're very interested in talking offline about that, because what we're trying to do is allow for automation of tasks that people are regularly doing when they're doing verification. So we use verification statuses. I'll talk a little bit about kind of how that principle gets applied in other contexts. But here we use orange, green, red, gray, and other colors. Just to give you a simple view of whether items are verified, unverified, false. You can customize those for your context, so you can change that to what you need. But what that allows, again, is for the project manager to do a quick scroll through. So this is from an actual project that we did with Credit Coalition, and so you can see which ones are complete, which ones are in progress, which ones the annotators cannot complete. So it gives you a very quick overview of the workflow and process. And then you can filter and sort based on that, so you can kind of see, you can start to see where your team is. This is super important with breaking news situations, but for media researchers as well, it helps with understanding where the annotators are at, and the kind of relative completeness of the data given your deadlines. And then another tool that we started adding in the context of media research, but also for journalists doing and human rights researchers, is we all are aware of this risk of data, of the things we're looking at disappearing. And this has been a particular challenge with Syria, where videos that have been uploaded and reviewed suddenly disappear. And I think any of us looking at misinformation know this pain as well. So we have a tool called Keep that we've integrated into Check. It does a number of things. One, it takes a screenshot of the URL, so you have your team has a private screenshot of the item. But then we can also send that link to archive.org, to archive.is, or to a custom tool called Video Vault, which is built by RightsLab. It's a tool built by RightsLab, which works with a lot of human rights researchers. And so we have a number of endpoints there. So if you have other ideas for archiving tools, we try to streamline that process again, because it's easy to forget that process, and it's highly manual at the moment. So as soon as you add the item to Check, it just gets archived right away. And when we're doing the Cred Coalition study that Amy will talk about, this actually proved really handy, because even within the context of just a few weeks, a number of URLs disappeared that we were looking at. We're starting to think about other ways to insert existing metadata, and here again, it's if you're building tools that analyze that, we want to just be able to show existing location data, the sources, timestamps, things like that, to streamline that process. And then there's the output side. I was talking about the color-coded statuses. Something we're starting to build is a tool that allows you to create images of your debunks, of your verification, that can live as artifacts elsewhere. So we're working with groups like Chicas Poderosas in Colombia, and in Mexico, where tools like WhatsApp are super important in terms of the context of where misinformation flows. So we're working with them to think about workflows for exporting content. So imagine an image where you can use these stamps. BuzzFeed does a lot of this as well. And you can give context to put a URL back to the check report, and then export that artifact, whether it's for Instagram, WhatsApp, for Twitter, however you want to customize it. But the idea here is that you can create different types of artifacts that can be embedded in other contexts, so that the work you're doing in check can live elsewhere in a different space. Reportedly tried this out a couple years ago, and was doing this with misinformation in terms of people who go missing after disasters, and they've noticed these patterns, and so they tweeted out an image that's marked it as fake, and then added some context. I think there's a lot more that we could do here. I think there's a lot more in terms of how this can be effective. But especially in terms of private messaging apps, it's something that we're thinking through a lot, because it's often the best way to reach people is through directly messaging inside the apps. So you can read more. I'll tweet out this link. You can read more about how check has been used in the context of verification. We worked with, again, election land and cross-check. This article also from the Human Lab also mentions our work with the University of Hong Kong and how this has been used with educators to train students on best practices around verification. And they generally found that it helped with that process because of the structure that we had. So this talks through some of those use cases, but I can also tweet out a few other links in terms of the human rights use cases. So again, there's our workflow. In terms of this orange side and the yellow side, this whole, well, actually all of it is, this whole workflow is relevant to what Amy will be discussing, which is the Credibility Coalition. There's our URL, again, I'll tweet all this out. But just to quickly introduce CredCo, it's led and co-founded by Midan and with Hackers. It was incubated at MisinfoCon, just downstairs actually during a late night hackathon session. So I'm excited to talk a little bit about it here.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Credibility Coalition, which I'm a part of, On is a part of. And it's basically that. It's a coalition of people from all sorts of areas interested in this. Journalists, computer scientists, of which I'm one of those, industry people, academics, et cetera. And what brought us all together is this question, can we come up with a shared understanding of what makes something credible? You know, another way of saying that is, what signals do we consider, you and I consider, when we evaluate a piece of content? And just to explain how we got to this question, as On mentioned, the inception of CredCo happened here at MisinfoCon, which was just a few floors down earlier last year. And the interesting thing was, we noticed at the hackathon, there were all these projects people had about countering misinformation. And they were things like, how can we computationally assess credibility? How can people crowdsource credibility assessments, either with their friends or collectively build lists? How can we convey credibility to readers? So in the form of a nutrition label or some sort of score, perhaps. And in one late night session, as you can see here, it was, I think, like 9 or 10 p.m., a bunch of people came together and said, well, wouldn't it be great if all these different projects that are working on these different tools could actually talk to each other? And I don't mean like human to human talking to each other, because that was happening during the conference, but system to system. So what if the people working on crowdsourcing credibility data, so what if their data could feed into the people working on education or showing credibility signals to readers? And so for that, what I'm basically talking about is a shared understanding of credibility. And one way to basically do that is develop a schema or a standard for signals around credibility. So I think about this as kind of like a tool for tools. So for people who want to share data or want to convey more than just a flag or just a score or just a pants on fire on a truthometer kind of signal, how would we do that? And can we agree on that? And there's a little bit of a media literacy angle there as well. So we started out with that goal in mind, started small and are planning to scale up. So over the course of the last half a year to a year, we've been doing workshops, and On has led several of these in various places. We've also gone to places like MozFest, the W3C annual meeting, and over all these workshops, we came up with a series of indicators. We refined that down to, right now, 16 is what we have. Things like exaggerated tone, clickbait titles. You know, what are the things that you think about when you think about what's credible about an article? Aggressive advertising on the page, the representativeness of the citations on the page, who are people citing, what is the source? So we grabbed, so from that we also grabbed the 40 most articles, 40 most shared articles in the last year, focusing on public health and climate science. And we did an initial test. We got annotators, some people who were trained as journalists, some people who were trained in sort of logical reasoning and analysis, and we had them annotate these 6 main indicators for these 40 articles. And so we had the same annotators also annotate the same things, so we could answer the question of how much do people agree with each other when they're thinking about these credibility signals? And then we also had domain experts come in and rate the credibility of these articles. So we could say, how well do these indicators annotated by non-domain experts line up with what domain experts actually think? And then to do this analysis, we partnered with these annotation tools. So Check by Mina, of course, Public Editor by the Berkeley Institute for Data Science, and also Hypothesis. And we wrote a paper about it. I would encourage you to go check out the paper. I won't go into the details of what we found, the data we collected here. We are also planning to release the data that we've collected hopefully by next week-ish on our website, which I'll share in a moment. So this paper is going to be at the WebConf or WWW next month, and it's a very long author list. And also we're planning on building this up. So we did kind of like a really small pilot test, testing our process and our analysis. And we're planning to scale up to something like 10,000 or 15,000 articles and also share all that data publicly with you all. And hopefully you will find it useful for your work. It's a little cut off, but we always talk about our mascot, the Credibility Hulk, or the Credible Hulk. Yeah. But yeah, that's just a little bit about Credibility Coalition. Come talk to me for more information.
Say like 3 words about eyebrows?
Yes. Okay, so I'm also a graduate student here at MIT working with David Karger, who asks a lot of questions sitting in the back. And we have together, as part of my PhD, built a tool called Eyebrows, which allows people to share aspects of their browsing history with other people. So it's an extension that you can use, you can install, and then you get to decide what you want to share, as opposed to, sharing everything, or in most cases, platforms and browsers taking everything from you. So you decide what you share, and then from that, you feed that data into a system. Other people can also see that information, and we also build social interactions into the tool, so you can bump into friends on the web, you can annotate parts of different articles and see what your friends are saying. So this is kind of also an interesting way, I think, for researchers to get data in a more ethical way. So if you're interested in that, come talk to me about that as well. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Thanks to both of you.
Thank you.
So this is the point in the conference where I would normally offer some sort of brilliant summary. I would knit together all the different threads. I would acknowledge everyone who'd given a great talk. I would make sure that everybody felt included and recognized, and so on and so forth. I would make inside jokes. I would announce that you should start following the Twitter account CSVVC Ltd. For our new CSV-based VC fund, which is working to ruthlessly monetize the technology that people actually use for big data. But I'm really tired and fighting off a cold. And frankly, there's been so much good stuff said, I'm not sure how much I can add to it. So here's what I'm going to say instead. I'm going to shut up in about 90 seconds. We're going to go out, grab some box lunches, and continue the conversation. This was sort of our example of a super lightweight conference. We've said a couple of times that we put the whole thing together in 6 weeks. We really did. We want to do another one, and we want to have more people involved. We want to have more outputs. We want to have more of these great conversations. If you want to talk with us about how to do it, where to do it, what we should cover, please be in touch with me. If you want to continue the conversation from this morning about what are the big questions, what are the data sets we need, what are the experiments that we want to do, please be in touch with me. If you want to keep getting information from this group, actually more to the point, if you don't want to keep hearing from this group, talk to Fernando and we'll make sure to sort of silence you. Other than that, we will do our best to feed some of the information coming out of this meeting to you. but I really hope that you found the last day and a half as useful as I did, which was not only getting a sense for what the landscape of this field looks like and what are the big questions that everybody else is trying out, but a sense of common vision and common mission, and a lot of people working with very different tools, very different analytic approaches, but looking at some of these same really deep and really important questions. So my hope, very simply, is that this will be the first of a number of times we get together. I really, really hope that neither Yohai or I will be as sick as we are at the next one of these things. I really hope that if we give Fernando Bermejo 6 months instead of 6 weeks to put something together, it will be 4 times as awesome. And I'm just so grateful for all of you for making some time. So let's grab some food. Let's have a round of applause for Fernando, for Lori, for our amazing AV team that's kept this going. For everyone who's been involved in organizing, we should have content up on the web in about a week. We will have some notes to share with you, and we hope to keep the conversation going. Thanks, everyone, for coming.